Okay guys, my concern here, other than it just doesn't look pretty, we have two compensation patterns occurring through this particular movement pattern for various reasons. Number one, if we look at the placement of the bar is placed very close to the cervical line or the cervical vertebra. For me, these vertebrae are quite vulnerable, very unstable, and quite susceptible to compressional forces as well as posture. A lot of neurolines off there. So if we look at the bottom end range of this movement pattern itself, we see that there's a compensation of a kind of hyperextension of those vertebrae, putting a lot of pressure in that line. If you look at the gravitational line, it's falling directly across there. For me, this could cause huge complications down the line. So you definitely got to have a look at that. Number two for me is the flexion from the hip, too much flexion from the hip and the torso to create the illusion of range of motion, as opposed to dorsiflexion of the ankle to give us proper range of motion. If you look at the bottom end range of this particular movement, we see that forward thrust of the torso to get us down. The problem with this is it puts a lot of pressure into the lumbar spine if you have a look at where the gravitational line cuts the body there. So this also needs to be looked at, guys. For those two reasons, I'd like to put this particular movement pattern in the category of currently under correction. And on a scale of 1 to 10, this is all kinds of gunk. So yeah, once again, two quick, easy ways to kind of overcome these compensations. Number one is we look at the placement of that bar, we roll that bar and make sure the placement of the bar is further back onto kind of the shoulder line. Get it right the way away from the cervical vertebra, make sure it sits on the back end of the shoulder line. And then what you see is what happens as we go into the movement pattern, we get to the bottom end range of that movement pattern. We no longer have that hyperextension into that cervical line. We now have a neutral neckline. And also the gravitational line now cuts us through the mid-thigh. It's all that gravitational force is now moved away from the cervical spine. It's now being bared across the shoulder and then of course straight down the line across the mid-thigh line. So we're good to go there. So my number two, I love to use a slight elevation under the heels to help with dorsiflexion within the ankle, help create a better range to the movement pattern going on to the bottom end range. For me, what it does is it allows the torso to be in a slightly more neutral position. We don't get as much flexion in the hip line itself. The gravitational line now cuts us through the kind of mid-thigh glute area as opposed to the lumbar line. For me, puts a lot less pressure, a lot less force into the lumbar line itself. So for me, guys, happy joints, happy days. And if you look at this movement pattern now with both these compensations corrected, guys, for me, this movement now looks sharp.
And don't forget, we only have one life. Squeeze it like a lemon.